Now I can see you. Great, thank you. All right, seeing that it is 2 o'clock, let's kick off our 22nd meeting of the New York State Climate Action Council. Thank you all for joining. I hope you're doing well and enjoying the first part of your summer. We've chosen to hold today's meeting via webinar as a matter of safety, as well as to enable broader participation across the state. And I will now hand it over to Jenny Cox from CADMIS to walk us through the procedures for today's meeting before we dive into the agenda.
Thank you, Sarah. If you could proceed to the next slide. Obviously, you all are largely familiar with this, but to ensure that we have another smooth and productive meeting, I'll just remind you all of our logistics and procedures for today's meeting. The first is just to please remain on mute if you are not speaking so we can limit any background noise. And we encourage all council members to join us on video if you're able, of course, especially if you're commenting or asking a question. However, it's understandable if you cannot participate via video today. To ask questions or provide your thoughts, we ask that you use the raise your hand feature using the hand icon on your screen. And when you're called, please go ahead and unmute yourself and place yourself back on mute once you are finished. All of these features can be seen right here on the right-hand side of the slide. And of course, if you have any questions or concerns about tech, you're more than welcome to email us at nys.cac@cadmisgroup.com. Pass it back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Jenny. We'll now turn to calling the roll to see which members of the council are in attendance today. NYSERDA's Valerie Milanovic, would you mind calling roll, please?
Not at all. Good afternoon, everyone. Co-Chair Harris? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
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 I know I saw her, so we'll assume she's still with us unless someone tells me otherwise.
Yeah, Val, can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you now, Doreen.
Sorry, I have a conflicting speaker here. Thank you.
That's okay. Co-Chair Sagos?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Commissioner Ball?
Good afternoon, all.
Commissioner Bassett or Henry Spletoff?
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Henry. Chair Christian?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Mario Salento?
Yes, here. Good afternoon, everyone.
Donna DeCarolis?
Here and good afternoon. Thank you.
You're welcome. Commissioner Dominguez?
Carolyn Ryan is on behalf of Commissioner Dominguez. She'll join in progress.
Thank you, Carolyn. Gavin Donahue?
Present. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks.
CEO Driscoll?
Yes, here. Good afternoon, everyone.
Dennis Elsenbeck? CEO Falcone? Rose Harvey? Bob Howarth?
Present, thank you.
Peter Iwanowitz?
Hi, I'm here. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon. President Knight?
Here and good afternoon, everyone.
Commissioner Reardon?
Commissioner Reardon reports she's here or she's having audio difficulties.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ann Reynolds?
I'm here. Yes, hello.
I believe on behalf of Secretary Rodriguez, Keisha Santiago Martinez?
I think I see her. This is Sarah. I think I may see her as an attendee, so she may need to be elevated.
Elevated?
Yeah. Yep, I'm here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Raya Salter?
Here, thank you very much.
Dr. Shepson?
I'm here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Commissioner Wisnauskas?
I'm here.
Okay, and one more shot at Dennis Elsenbeck, CEO Falcone, and Rose Harvey. We do have a quorum for today's meeting, and I'll keep an eye out for additional members.
Yes, I will note CEO Falcone's having some issues joining, so if the tech team can help him, that'd be great.
Great.
Well, thank you, Val. And thanks for everyone for attending here today. As you can see from today's agenda, some items are our standard items. We'll consider minutes from the last council meeting, and Basil and I will share some remarks and reflections. With respect to the primary content, we have a panel presentation and discussion with several labor leaders on workforce considerations that will follow that section. And that will be followed by the briefing that we were not able to get to last time on the Disadvantaged Communities Barriers and Opportunities report. This was released at the end of last year and is required per the Climate Act to be incorporated into the scoping plan. There will be an update on public comments that have now been received and a report out from the subgroups on the work they've been conducting. And finally, we'll wrap with next steps. So certainly a full agenda. But before we kick off formally, I did certainly want to offer an opportunity for Mario Salento, our newest member of the Climate Action Council, to introduce himself. As we discussed last time on May 3rd, 2022, Governor Hochul announced the appointment of Mr. Salento, who is the president of the New York State AFL-CIO, as our, as I said, newest member. So certainly, Mario, we're very happy that you've joined us. And if you had a few words, I'd welcome you to offer them now.
Good, thank you. Well, thank you, Doreen. And I'll only be a minute, but I do want to thank you, Doreen. And yes, I am very pleased to join all of you as part of this council. Very honored. And as you know, obviously, this council has been working for 2 years without labor representation. So first, I do want to say that I'm very grateful to Governor Hochul for appointing me to represent workers. And I also want to thank Doreen. I want to thank Roberta for their work to make the transition for me as smooth as possible and for getting me acclimated as well. I do want to take just 1 or 2 brief moments just to say a few things. And I apologize in advance to the members of the Gas Transition Subcommittee who've already heard what I'm about to say, but since this is my first opportunity to address this council, and because of the amount of progress that you've made prior to my appointment, it is incumbent upon me to share labor's unequivocal goal in this process, and that is simply this: to combat climate change while protecting workers. It really is that simple. Ensuring that newly created jobs are good union jobs, minimizing job loss, ensuring that any worker who loses their job because of steps taken to combat climate change is promptly, if not immediately, reemployed at the same rate of pay or greater. We must include these commitments to workers in the most concrete and enforceable terms possible. Now, I've read a lot the last couple of weeks. So obviously we've seen all the same things, and that it's projected that approximately 211,000 jobs or so will be created over time, that approximately 22,000 jobs are going to be lost. But as we move forward over time, those numbers must be made more specific. And as much as we realistically and possibly can, first of all, particularly for the job loss section of this, because those figures are more than just their numbers. They represent human beings and families who are going to lose their livelihoods. The intangible nature of projected job creation, that's somewhat understandable. But job loss is fully and completely tangible, particularly to those who know that their livelihoods, their ability to support themselves and their families is at risk and most likely finite. So that's why a concrete commitment to workers in the most enforceable terms possible is so important. And I say to you today, as my first time as one of these meetings, I ask for your partnership in achieving that goal. And the first step, I think, to fully understanding the current workforce and the impact of different climate change mitigation efforts is anticipating how the workforce is going to change in the future. So first, we have to quantify the numbers, as I said, for jobs created and jobs lost. But we also have to have information about, rate of pay, benefit levels, work location, skills, responsibilities, employers for positions that are going to be eliminated, and expectations with respect to these categories for the positions that will be created. We have to track our success in maintaining employment and reemploying individuals, because while training tracking is important, the training is meaningless if the worker isn't employed. So We feel that as a movement that this information should be updated on a periodic basis, no less than every 6 months. As part of the transition, we need to ensure that those workers' organizing rights are protected. Workers who have chosen a union must be able to keep that union. Workers in newly created positions must have the most robust organizing rights and protections we can offer. And in that vein, I don't think this is a surprise to anyone. Considering the tremendous amount of support in both houses of the legislature and the executive herself, all projects moving forward should include language that specifically calls for labor peace, project labor agreements, prevailing rate, Buy American, Buy New York, worker training funding. So we've seen all of that. Also, we should limit the impacts on other industries. Not a surprise. What good is our work here if it shutters in-state facilities whose work is then sent out of state? In addition, we need to immediately think of energy-intensive industries such as manufacturing and smelting, but we need to keep in mind industries such as restaurants, hospitality, so forth and so on. Similarly, we have to be careful to avoid actions that would encourage importation of energy from outside New York. And I know, again, this is something that's been discussed at your meetings. Last is, we also have to anticipate and lessen the impact on municipalities that rely on these property tax payments from facilities that are going to be shuttered. The reality is, when that tax base is lost, it hurts our education system and our schools, our hospitals and our healthcare, transportation, sanitation, so on and so forth. I'll end with this, so I really don't want to take too much time. I'm aware of what I just said is familiar to everyone here. And these issues have been raised previously by members of the Just Transition Working Group. It's now time for the Climate Action Council to build on that work, and with as specific and definitive measures as possible. And again, just to be clear, the labor movement intends to be a committed partner in this historic endeavor, and I look forward to working with all of you to achieve our shared goals. And I do strongly believe that anticipating and addressing as many of the concerns as possible during this process will increase the CLCPA's likelihood of long-term success. So again, thank you. I have a little bit of catching up to do, but I promise I will be a strong and willing partner in all this. And again, Doreen, thank you very much. And Basil, thank you very much for all of your kindness these past few weeks.
Well, thank you, Mario. We're glad to have you on the council, and you have come up to speed very quickly. You're a quick read. So thank you for that, and looking forward to your engagement both within the subgroups and within the council itself. So with that, if we turn to the next slide, let's proceed with consideration of the minutes from the last meeting. The council members received the draft minutes with their meeting materials. Are there any discussion items on the minutes from May 26, 2022? Okay, we can move to approve the minutes then. So I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move it.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Does anyone disapprove of the minutes? Thank you. Since no opposition was expressed, the minutes are adopted and will be posted on the Climate Action Council's website. Thank you all, and over to my co-chair to begin some remarks and reflections.
Thank you, Doreen, and echoing the nice welcome to Mario, welcome you here. I know this is going to be a productive group with you aboard. Just a few quick things up front. I think everyone knows where we are on the disadvantaged communities criteria and the public hearings we've been having on that. I believe it's about 10 hearings we did around the state. And as I'd said before, not very well attended. So we are extending the public comment period, if you haven't seen that, to August 5th. Please help us get the word out about that. I don't need to tell all of you how important this criteria actually is, but for the larger community of New York, we had great turnout at our CAC hearings, and it's really been somewhat lackluster at the disadvantaged communities criteria hearings. So if we can push folks to become aware of this and to weigh in now that we get another 30 or a little less than 30 days on that period. So thank you. Next slide, please. Quite a bit in the works recently. Last week, or maybe it was the week before, dealing with the Supreme Court fallout on the EPA versus West Virginia opinion, giving us all a pause as to where things are heading at the federal level for sure. And if nothing else, reinforcing the importance of state action and multi-state action as we can contemplate our future with perhaps at least a short-term, a weakened EPA, and puts more of the burden on, frankly, us and our sister states, those of whom are taking action complementary to ours. We last week launched a very exciting statewide air monitoring initiative in the Bronx. That's Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado right there, and Lisa Garcia as well. We had some turnout also from our friends, some of whom on the meeting today. This is really an exciting initiative. This is a chance for us to really be a national leader on this at a state level. No one has ever done this type of hyper local air monitoring at a statewide basis. And this actually is a chance to focus on the disadvantaged communities that we've identified. Now, 10 of them around the state. We're launching in 4 of them, starting in New York City, at Upper Manhattan, parts of the Bronx, up to Albany, and then Niagara Falls, Buffalo. So that monitoring is going right now. It's going to give us this unprecedented look at the pollution faced at the street level, really lot and block, and give us that visibility as to where problems are so we can go and fix them. And then later this summer, we'll be announcing phase 2, which is the next 6 communities, which is Manhattan, actually Brooklyn, Queens, Yonkers, Mount Vernon, Rochester, Syracuse, and Hempstead, Long Island. So this is going to be something that over the next year, we will probably be able to report out to you all on what we're seeing and what the trend lines are. But certainly at the end of the upcoming year, we'll have an unprecedented view of air pollution at the very local level in some of the state's most disadvantaged communities. We're also announcing, I think folks are aware, a grant program to help disadvantaged communities groups, so community benefit organizations within those communities get access to capacity building funding. We've made $1 million available already to help build up some of that capacity, and we'll be announcing later in the summer another $2 million grant program to help community groups further develop their own air monitoring. So all of this, our state monitors that are fixed, the mobile monitors that we're doing right now, the citizen monitoring that will be happening will hopefully all be integrated into this system that provides us some guidance moving forward. Governor also signed 3 very exciting bills that came out of the legislature this year: the Appliance and Building Standards, Advanced Building Codes, Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act, and legislation requiring prevailing wage for large renewable energy projects. That's all very exciting. Some of you were at that announcement. Thank you for attending. And then lastly, DEC, I think as you all saw, denied the application at the Greenwich facility, a renewal application for that facility, largely based on our application of the CLCPA to that particular application. So quite busy. Turn it back over to you, Doreen. Get the meeting going.
Yes, I should say so. Certainly an incredible bill signing event last week, and really glad to see many of you there as well. Next slide, please. And also in this time frame, Governor Hochul announced historic awards for our 5th annual solicitation of large-scale renewable energy. This year, we announced 22 large-scale solar and energy storage projects across the state, and now more than 2,400 megawatts awarded as well, with $3 billion in direct investments as a result of this announcement. So really, when we look at this annual cadence, I'm thrilled to say that we now have more than 120 projects under contract across the state, all the way into the Atlantic Ocean, all bringing together progress toward our 2030 renewable goals that would approximate about 66% renewables by 2030, well on our way to the 70% renewable goal within the Climate Act. So something to be very proud of and indicative of the level of commitment that not only do we need to have in the renewables sector, and we do have, but need to expand certainly to every sector of our economy. And speaking of that, if we turn to the next slide, I'm pleased to just report out on a request that had been made and has been fulfilled. The New York Independent System Operator has offered to provide council members with a tour of their control room. We talk a lot about the topic of our grid and the needs of our grid in this highly decarbonized future. So I'm excited to say that, as you can see here, the New York ISO has set aside several options for dates and times for council members to tour the control room and to learn more about what it means to realize the future that we're all heading toward together. In terms of what you can expect from the tour, if we go to the next slide, please, you will see, and as I know my co-chair and I have both seen, you'll have an opportunity to see and have an in-depth and real-time view of how the system operates and is balanced for reliability, including showing real-time production of renewables, demand forecasting data, and transmission constraints. And also to witness directly how these multiple factors are very dynamic, literally changing from 1 minute to the next, and how they are accommodated through their operating conditions and parameters as well. The NISO will also discuss the future of planning for our grid and reliability at the same time and what they're doing to help achieve our goals. So with these dates in mind, I know Sarah Osgood will shortly reach out via email to coordinate availability within the times that have been offered by the NISO, and happy really for this opportunity for us to witness some of the aspects of the grid that we speak about very regularly. And so with that, we are going to turn, if you don't mind, to the next slide, which is the topic of workforce considerations. And certainly while we've had a good amount of focus at previous meetings on our subgroups and public comment process, the subgroups and the comment reviews are not the only work streams before the council, as we've discussed. And at the last meeting, we mentioned additional topics for council discussion outside of these subgroups, including workforce development, climate justice and equity, awareness and education campaigns, and funding and financing, again, beyond the policies being considered as part of the economy-wide policies subgroup. And so our next item today relates to one of these non-subgroup items, workforce considerations. And as we make this transition to decarbonize our economy, I think we can all agree that we want this to be as comprehensive, smooth, and just for everyone involved. And there are many factors and needs to consider in achieving those outcomes. So I'm pleased to say we have a panel before the council today to present to us on some of those considerations. And I'm certainly pleased to be joined by several labor leaders with whom we've been working for several years on this transition. First, Gary LaBarbera, the president of the New York State Building and Construction Trade Council. Jim Slevin, the national president of the Utility Workers of America. Peter Donahue, assistant to the national president of the Transport Workers Union of America. And Dave Wasira, assistant to the director of the United Steelworkers District 4. So each of our speakers in turn will provide a brief presentation with their thoughts, and then we'll open it up to the council members for questions and discussion. In total, we have about an hour for this agenda item. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gary LaBarbera to kick off the presentations. Gary?
Well, thank you very much, Doreen. I appreciate the opportunity today, along with my fellow labor leaders, to present on workforce considerations. I also want to congratulate again Mario Salento and thank him publicly at this meeting for serving on the Climate Action Council. Excuse me, just getting over COVID, so I'm a little nasally, but just bear with me. So I want to thank Mario again for his serving on the council, and I think he'll bring an important voice to the overall objectives set forth. So look, you're probably going to hear a lot of redundancy in the comments that I'm going to make that Mario made, and probably some of the following speakers. But let me, for the edification of the Climate Council, just kind of give a little bit of a history of where we've been and where we are and where we hope to go in terms of, certainly I'll speak on behalf of the building trades, but I'd like to speak a little bit on behalf of Climate Jobs New York as well, which is a coalition of unions. So I would say probably about 3 years ago, certainly for the building trades and other unions that are on this call, along with the New York State AFL-CIO Mario Salento, we all began to contemplate what the future looks like in terms of the new green economy and the move towards renewable energy sources. And we felt strongly then and now that labor has to be at the table. And because of the job creation, we wanted to ensure that the work that will be created and the opportunities that will be created from this transition will result in maintaining good union wages and transitioning workers, as Mario said, that will be losing their employment into new employment opportunities that they will be able to provide for their families with good middle-class careers with benefits, etc. And also for growing a workforce. We recognize that we'll need to grow a workforce, train a workforce. Training is going to be very, very important, in particular in the offshore wind area, as you're all very, very familiar with. That requires specific training that we are working now in the building trades with our national organization, NAB2, North American Building Trades Unions, to get us up to speed for the offshore wind training. And we're looking at existing facilities and perhaps creating new facilities to do this training. So that's a big part of it, obviously, is having a trained and ready workforce to accommodate the need for, in particular on the offshore wind, the installation and construction of the offshore wind turbines. Obviously, we are concerned more than offshore wind. We obviously onshore wind, solar, and as Mario mentioned, labor peace agreements and incentives to buy American, and certainly incentives to buy manufactured products when available from the state of New York. And all of those goals, I think we've really done a great job in cooperation with, I give NYSERDA and Doreen Harris an enormous amount of credit and her team for supporting these concepts. We've been able to codify into statute over the last 2 years through the budget process, as well as through the legislative sessions, labor standards for offshore and onshore wind, for solar, which we just actually have increased those protections on solar to 1 megawatt or more to require prevailing wages and project labor agreements. For the offshore and onshore wind, it's currently 5 megawatts or more. These requirements would kick in. And again, the labor peace components so that workers can be organized and be free to organize is very, very, very important as well. And our view all along has been, look, we recognize that we have a climate crisis, but we also need to recognize that we have a crisis of inequity. And this is an opportunity for all stakeholders to make a big difference here. We have, I think, a unique opportunity to get this right. And what I mean by getting it right is addressing those two issues. One, obviously, moving to a more sustainable future in terms of energy, which is renewables. But we believe that it's going to require more than just renewables. We believe that hydrogen is going to be a big part of this, as was mentioned earlier. The thermal loops bill that was just signed recently by the governor. These are all other ways in which these are zero emissions that can augment and supplement renewables. I will say to you that, and I've had many conversations time to time with Doreen and others. I'm in regular conversation with the offshore wind developers. Some of that are actually engaging now. For example, Ørsted and Equinor very, very soon. I actually met with both of those organizations last week, week before last rather, to discuss what the future looks like. And there are very robust goals set in the CLCPA. And I know there's a rush to decarbonize, but I'm hearing from my colleagues in California that, they're looking now at some real gaps in terms of energy production and resources, because renewables will not be ready over the next couple of years to sustain the grid. And I think that's something that we have to be very, very smart about. I think that's why this Climate Action Council has to take all things into consideration. But on the workforce considerations, look, what we are looking for is to ensure that the jobs that will be created will be good middle-class careers that will provide the ability for workers to maintain a middle-class lifestyle, as well as we're looking for not only the existing workers, but we're looking for to really be able to create opportunities for many underserved communities in this new workforce. And we believe that the opportunities there, and it can be accomplished. If we look at the infrastructure bill, President Biden's infrastructure bill, and we look at all the work, and there is work, obviously there that addresses climate. There is money there for that. I mean, one of the things that is a part of that bill is workforce development, and helping underserved communities in the process. And so I think that, as the council continues to deliberate and move forward on these very important issues, the workforce component must be always at the forefront of this, because again, I think we have a very unique opportunity here to address two crises in our society. One obviously is climate, and the other is inequity. And I think if we continue to work together the way we have, I think that we can certainly accomplish both those goals. So I'll stop there because there's other things I could say, but I'm sure my brothers in labor will add to what I'm saying and have their own thoughts. And again, I don't want it to be overly redundant. So I'll put a pause on it. Of course, available for any questions after the rest of the panelists present. And again, Noreen, thank you very much for the opportunity, along with the rest of the council, to be heard today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Appreciate you joining and providing that perspective. I'm sure the members will have topics to discuss after we continue. Jim Slevin, what is next?
I appreciate it, Doreen, and the rest of the council. Thank you for the opportunity today to speak to everyone. First, I want to start off, and I applaud the state for placing Mario on this council. It's so vitally important that we have the voice of labor, and we have full trust in Mario in making sure he brings all voices from all parts of and sectors of labor to make sure that we're all heard on our issues that are common in goals, and making sure that we're not left behind in a way. I'm the national president for the Utility Workers Union of America. I based out of New York, but I see the broader spectrum of how climate is being attacked or being watched after, and how we're making these transitions across the country. And there are certain things that I see that are good and certain things that aren't that great. But I will tell you, on the side of New York, you're going to hear the redundancy sides of us from labor, but it is about jobs. I use a saying in my when I speak about my memberships of veterans of energy. It's no disrespect to our veterans that are in the military, but our members have been and served communities in the utility industry for decades. And they have made sure that the communities have grown, and not only along with their families, but also making sure it's provided for their families and their communities. And these jobs are very good paying jobs, and jobs that have been for decades well respected in the communities that they serve. But I will tell you that not just in this state, but in other states, we feel that we're under attack. A few years ago, I would say, in the history side, the labor would probably never sit in a room with environmentalists to talk about climate and jobs in the same conversation. And I think I agree with Gary saying about we are in a vital point in this transition, that making sure that these conversations keep going on, because we are so on key on the same thing. We want to make sure that the climate is being looked after and making sure that it's being addressed, but also making sure that no workers are left behind. in any of these communities, and making sure that it's not just the worker, but the community also impacted by it, that they're not left behind. Because it's not just the utility job, it's also the job from that school teacher to the road maintenance person to the police officer that they serve in that community. When we close down plants, these are the impacts that happen. It's not just the one, it's a domino piece to it. Now, I think we need to make sure that we watch that and we carefully make sure that they're not forgotten. Because as my workers feel, they haven't seen the success story that Mario talked about. We've seen plant closures, and we have not seen the success story of them moving into other jobs. Right now, I have workers that are dismantling a power plant, but that's not the job where they signed up for. They were operators or maintenance people in these power plants, and fine, they're getting paychecks, but there is also a piece of their knowledge and their skills that are being left in an area that they feel that they're just putting time in so that they get through with a paycheck. So we have to look at that. I think also we not only on the generation side, we have to look at the utility sides on distribution and transmission. There's a ton of work that is needed in the distribution side and transmission side of our utilities. You know, as we're hitting closer and we're in the beginning of storm season, we see more and more of these attacks on storms, but we don't see the increase in workforces. We see more of mutual aid being used or contractors. What I look at now is almost our energy policy in the state of New York is everybody goes out and buys a generator. And that shouldn't be. We have plenty of workers there that could fill those voids and making sure that they're able to work in these systems that they're very familiar with and understand. Our utilities definitely need to start hiring. They're way understaffed, and I think that's from all sides, from the electric side to our gas side to our steam side of our system. Right now, about an hour ago, I just looked on a grid and I saw that about 1,282 megawatts come in from Canada. My membership see that. Those are what they consider jobs that are no longer here. And those are the things that impact them day in and day out. That's just power from Canada. Never mind what's coming from our neighboring states. And it's so vitally important that we actually look at this to make sure that when we make decisions, that these decisions are not just decisions to meet the goals, but actually decisions that are now decisions for the impacts of the workers and the communities they serve. And making sure that we're going to get to our goals, but let's make those vitally important decisions on making sure we get to our goals with making sure that we're looking after the impacts of workers in this state. And not just the utility worker that's been on that job for 10, 20 years, but actually the future utility worker. You know, I'm happy that the state has opened up 22 projects, but we need to get the younger generation trained on this new renewable energy side of it. And we need to make sure that when these projects are put in, that the training's associated with it and making sure that the job tasks are associated with it, not just for the current utility worker, but the utility worker of the future. This is the pivotal time in our movement that we can actually say that we have control of it because we actually can make the destiny and make the good chapters at the end of the book. I think it's so vitally important. I also think that we have to actually look at investments. You know, hydrogen has to be on the table. It has to be actually looked at and considered more and more because I see what goes on out in California and in the trucking industry. They're going to rely tremendously on the hydrogen gas. I think also we need to look at hydro. I think we need to look at starting projects that we could probably build with hydro dams and tide power. These are things, we have a canal authority that should be actually investing more and more at it every day. I think also we should really look at our decommissioning rules that went in decades ago. I don't think they fit for today. I think we really need to look at it. Our utilities want to invest in solar. And right now they can't invest in it because of deregulation rules in a lot of ways. And then also I think we need to really look at projects that come on board and not hastily look at them. Where we have power plants that are willing to invest their own money to make sure they run cleaner and making sure that they're actually running in a better capacity. And understand that we know that they may not be here in 10 more years, but for now, they actually want to put the investment sides of it. My membership are really, really concerned. And I know we talk about jobs, but I will tell you this. They look at it day in and day out. Am I going to be in this place of work in 5 more years from now? Now, I know that may happen and that may not happen. But when everyone is talking in the hallways, they're looking at it and saying, is this really what I want to see happen in the state, and making sure we meet our goals? I mean, goals are great, like I said, but we really got to look at the issues present. We will meet our goals if we address these issues and take them into strong consideration, making sure that we don't forget the worker, nor the community, nor climate in the same conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Next up was Pete Donahue.
Yes, hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm here speaking on behalf of John Samuelson, the International President of Transport Workers Union, Transport Workers Union of America, the 150,000 or more workers in the transportation sector across the United States, and 55,000 in New York. And I'm speaking in particular to the TW, well, on behalf of the TW Local 101 members who work for National Grid in Brooklyn, in Queens. I mean, first off, TW very much supports this effort. We live in, we all live on the same planet, and we have the same current concerns for our health and the health of our children. A lot of our workers are in the mass transit industry, running the subways and buses in New York. And, there's no greater greening project than getting people to ride mass transit and get out of their cars. But to be honest, we have some very serious problems. The president has some very serious problems. TW has some very serious problems with this plan or components of this plan, certain scenarios that could be in this plan. It brings back nightmares of Nafta and of blue collar workers being abandoned. And, we talk about jobs, as Mario said, numbers, and you can talk about retraining, and you can talk about, these are men and women, many of them from disadvantaged communities, our members. I think we're 60% are Latin or Hispanic or African American. Many live in Brooklyn and Queens. And these are jobs that put food on the table. These are jobs that keep the lights on. These are jobs that enable them to pay the rent and pay the mortgage. And I think that kind of gets lost. And that's one of the reasons, and I hope some of you saw the many faces out there when we had a rally in Brooklyn, some 600 people out there. But it's much more than just paying the rent, and it's important to those things, taking care of your family. As Constance Bradley, who is the president of Local 101, said from that podium that, she grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And she said, for people in her community, these types of blue collar union jobs, like the National Grid jobs that Constant has and the 1,600 members have, they offer hope in those communities. They offer hope that you can have the middle class. They offer hope that you can retire with dignity. They offer hope that you can too participate in the American dream. And so I don't think that can be stressed enough. We don't think that can be stressed enough. And so when we think about this process, I think we have to keep the faces of those people in mind. And these people are very concerned, very worried, very angry too. They spent a lot of time converting from diesel to natural gas. They see themselves that they were called almost like, heroes in this transition to a less polluting world. And through the pandemic, they were out there working, making sure that everybody had the heat and what they needed to take care of their families and for the business to keep going. So they feel hurt, they feel angry, and they feel like this is history happening all over again, and that blue collar America is a second thought and just too easily pushed aside. So that's the negative part of it. But the good thing about this is we're not in the business of fighting with companies. Transport Workers Union is not generally fighting with corporations. We honestly think that the National Grid, and first of all credit to everybody for getting a company as big as National Grid to turn their business model on its head. I mean, they're taking big steps to eliminate the use of natural gas. That's monumental. That's historic. And I think like I said, we think they have a sound plan, and we think that any plan has to include everything that is good for the environment. And we think that includes projects that also include like biogas. So I want to talk about biogas, renewable. We believe that is renewable projects for a second. The science is on the side of using biogas. It's not the same as natural gas. And I came across the press release that was put out during the Bloomberg administration when the Newtown Creek project was announced. And the people who are standing there singing praise about this technology being exactly what we need to do, capturing emissions from wastewater, taking food waste and putting in and capturing that instead of just out in landfills. It's the directors and the commissioners, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, the Mayor's Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability, Natural Resources Defense Council, the New York League of Conservation Voters, the Environmental Defense Funds. They're all describing this as a win-win, a significant opportunity to mine the resources in that waste stream for clean, reliable energy. At no cost to ratepayers, these projects will harness a byproduct of the wastewater treatment process to provide renewable natural gas to local residents while helping to clean the air we all breathe. That's the Department of Environmental Protection Commissioner. So the real scientists, the real experts who have been in this field for their entire lives know that this is a smart and effective way of meeting your targets. And we are adamant that this should be included. Yes, we support electrification a lot. We support the battery storage, the solar, the wind, the conservation. But you can't put all our eggs in one basket of electrification. We think that there has to be some biogas in there. And the beauty of that, going back to where I started, is you have the existing infrastructure that has been, I don't know how many billions and billions of dollars have been spent building this safe infrastructure. You have an experienced and skilled workforce, and you can use them. You can use this. You can meet your goals. This is not against the goals at all. You meet the goals. A scientist will tell you this will help you meet your goals without throwing these blue-collar workers aside, without turning their lives upside down. I mean, a couple years salary, it's just not going to work. And we've seen this story before. I mean, the idea that you're going to take a 45-year-old, 55-year-old guy who's been working on high-pressure mains his whole life and give him a couple of community college classes and think he's going to be sitting at someplace, next to a millennial making, a good salary in technology, we just don't buy it. We don't think that's going to happen. But we are 100% committed. We applaud everything, the goals on this. We want to be part of the solution, and we think that we can be a very useful part of the solution. But we very much think that you have to consider everything and consider it's too early to be throwing things out. It's too early in this process to be closing the door to biogas, to be closing the door to green hydrogen. We know technology is advancing every day. We know that this will get you to the goals that you want to meet. And we're, on other subjects, and this is the beginning, right? I mean, our understanding is this is a plan that's revisited every 5 years. This is not the ninth inning. This is, in essence, this is actually the beginning. This is not the end of a process, the beginning of the process. Very quickly, I also say that we are very concerned about reliability. We are very concerned about the reliability of the grid. And another reason why we think you should keep this distribution system intact with the workforce intact. We're very concerned about the cost, not only to homeowners, but to taxpayers and to society overall. I haven't seen too many figures, but how much would it cost to electrify an entire housing project in New York City? I mean, even if you had all the money in the world, you probably would still need more money if you start throwing out viable options, part of the menu, like the existing distribution figure system. And we're concerned our members are homeowners, and there will be a cost. There will be a cost to electrification to homeowners. There's no doubt about it. You know, my house probably does not have the electric grid capacity to put everything on electric. So I would have to retrofit. I would have to put extra panels in. There would have to be extra. So yeah, I mean, hopefully the government's going to give $10,000-$15,000 to every homeowner to do this. So we're concerned about all those things. But just the final message is, again, we do want to be partners. We support and applaud everything that you're doing. We think the bottom line is we think there is a way to get to your goal without destroying the lives and livelihoods of these utility workers in Brooklyn and Queens.
Thank you, Peter. And last up was Dave.
Hi, Doreen. How are you?
Hello.
It's good to be with everybody. I just wanted to say thank you, and you know, I'm very lucky with what I do with the United Steelworkers District 4. My territory covers 9 states in the Northeast, as well as the island of Puerto Rico, and I can say that New York State is ahead on most issues, and one of them is including labor in these discussions right from where we are at this point today, and appointing Mario is a big part of that, who has the knowledge and the background and the support of all the affiliates in New York State as he moves forward through this process. So just wanted to say thank you, and we don't see this in other areas. These conversations are always a little fun for me when somebody says, here's Dave from the United Steelworkers, because as I talk to people, the first image of the United Steelworkers obviously is a smokestack union, right? We are the steelworkers. One of our core industries is paper, and we've been at the forefront of this movement for a long time now on the manufacturing end of it, and work hand in hand with our brothers and sisters in the trades and the utility and in utility unions. But the environment is very important to us for multiple reasons, right? We need to leave better for the next generations to come. If we are working in a facility, our members are, that is not environmentally friendly, our workers are really at ground zero of the environmental issue, and 7 or 8 out of 10 times they have to go back into that same community that's being polluted. So there really is no escape from it. So we work as hard as we possibly can to do a couple of things. One, it's to make obviously our workplaces as safe and as we possibly can, and 2, to make sure we're being community partners as well as far as the environment is concerned. And our work through the Blue Green Alliance and some of the other groups across the country is vital to that as New York moves towards net zero emissions, which is critical to talk about net zero emissions versus zero emissions. There is a big distinction. Net zero emissions is going to be hard enough, right? There's as we decarbonize, 2 main issues that we're going to see. Some industries just need large amounts of power to do things like melt metal. I'm out of a brass and copper facility myself. In order to melt copper cathode, you need a 3,000 degree furnace, and then you need to add zinc, and we need to make sure that whatever is out there and whatever is coming, and whether it's electrification is tough in those situations. We see it somewhat in the steel industry, but we also need to make sure we're doing other things, because we'll never be able to get to zero carbon emissions and protecting those types of industries. And no different than the cement industry. There's a chemical process that releases carbon emissions. So how do we do that safely, and how do we do that while protecting the environment? I think New York has to, retain its competitiveness in the industry by working with industry, which we are more than willing to partner with. We know without employers, we don't have membership to represent. We need to partner as we move forward. I think New York State needs to do the same thing of bringing some of these high energy intensive industries to the table. You need to continue, and you guys are, I said in the beginning of this, taking a great first step, bringing unions in and bringing labor in to have these conversations, and also on the federal level to deploy decarbonization technologies on a reasonable timeline. And that's something you just heard my brother talk about, reasonableness in the timeline, not to rush to get to a goal, but to make sure we're doing this right, to make sure that the technology is right and it's feasible for the economy. We need to deploy clean energy in a way that will continue to provide access to affordable and reliable electricity for industry too, which is also a main user. And look, all of this can be done when we talk about net zero, when we have negative emission technology to reduce emissions, when we work towards industry decarbonization. Negative emissions can come from natural gas solutions like planting trees or carbon removal technology like direct air capture. We know, and we've seen it already here in New York, and I'll talk about this in a minute in a little bit more detail, but there is, in manufacturing, we are poised to see a lot of resources leaving, and it could be very devastating. And we need to make sure we're working together to mitigate that damage as much as we possibly can. We should not lose jobs to decarbonization mandates by incentivizing industrial companies to offshore to other less restrictive states or countries. I mean, look, in the manufacturing sector, we fight right to work all the time, right? With companies closing, shuttering, moving down south. We've already talked about trade agreements. We need to make sure that we're not perpetuating that or making it much easier. We must use technology to retain the jobs that we have currently here in the state. I mentioned carbon capture, switching to new fuels. We've heard hydrogen, and I know there's other solutions along those same lines that are coming or will be ready by the time the goal of 2050 comes. This point I'm going to make is big, and it hits home for the steelworkers directly. We should also work to prevent job loss in the fossil fuel manufacturing supply chain by retooling and diversifying. And I'm talking about Olean, New York, and the Siemens facility in Olean that closed recently that the steelworkers represented. They made turbines for the gas and oil industry. Siemens had absolutely no interest in retooling that facility to be able to provide for the renewable energy industry. We lost hundreds of jobs in Olean, New York, which just devastates a community. And we need to work together to be able to prevent that. And we've done this already with New York and the federal government. Years ago, we had a problem with Alcoa up in Messina, New York. And that facility was in very big trouble. And we came together with the teachers union, the governor at the time, Chuck Schumer, to make sure that we had an incentive package there to keep Alcoa, because the teachers knew at that time, Alcoa closes in Messina. That's the last large manufacturing facility, and it's going to devastate the schools. It's going to devastate budgets. It's going to devastate towns. So we need to make sure we're focused on being able to retool. And I know there's some of this in the offshore wind where we're looking at retooling industry to be able to supply Buy American needs, but we need to make sure we're looking overall at this, because as manufacturing jobs are forced under decarbonization to leave areas, it is going to devastate smaller and really medium-sized communities too. Buy American is going to be key throughout this process also. No matter what we move to, we need to make sure that we are creating these jobs for the future. We need to be able to point to some wins through this process. I still hear, and it's not only in Western New York, it's not only in Olean, it's not only in New York State. I hear, Dave, you're working on this environmental stuff on behalf of the union. What were you able to do for the workers in Olean? This isn't going to work. This is all we're going to see. And right now, we're not seeing the positive returns on this. And until we start seeing some wins like this, it's going to be negative press. It's going to be members pushing back on unions. And it's going to be members pushing back on states through elections until we can start pointing to some real success in this area and strategically mapping and connecting new businesses with workers in New York State. And where we can't do that, we do need assistance in job replacement. We need robust training programs. And we talked a little bit about this. It can't just be putting the 55-year-old steelworker with a basic education, if even that, into a school setting and say, hey, you worked in this brass and copper factory for 30 years, you were fantastic. Now we're going to expect you to go work in a clean room at Tesla after you go through 2 years of schooling. Good luck to you, and we'll see, we'll see how you come out at the end. It just doesn't work. It's a program that's outdated. It's a program that does not take in consideration for individual people who are losing their jobs. We can say we're going to lose X number of jobs in this, and Mario talked about this in the beginning, and we'll gain Y number of jobs of that. But I've worked in a manufacturing facility for 20 years, and I can tell you, somebody who has had more time on the job than I have, if their particular machine is not running that day, it's almost panic mode for what they have to do. Think of that. You go in at 11:30 at night into a manufacturing facility and you get told your job is down for the day and you're going to have to go run another job that you were trained on 2 years ago and you don't have that much experience. There is nerves, there's safety concern. Now tell that same person, well, you're no longer going to work here. Sorry, you're going to have to get pension assistance, but we're going to train you for some other fictional job in the future. And what that does, the devastation to families, the devastation to communities. So we need to make sure we're tailoring any retraining to workers who haven't been in academic settings in a very, very long time with real world experience. And look, we talk about this and we talk a lot about, how we can partner school districts and the such, but this isn't anything new for New York. And when I talk throughout the 9 states that I represent, I point to New York kind of as that beacon of, hey, look, if we can do it in New York, we can do it in, pick a state, Massachusetts, New Jersey. And because we've already done it here. When the coal-fired power plant at Huntley was closing, labor came together with teachers in the town, environmental groups here in Western New York. And we said, well, what are we going to do for the community that's going to be left behind by the Huntley closing? And New York State came to the plate. There was money that came into the budget to make sure the teachers didn't lose, the jobs that they were going to. And I think at every opportunity and every turn, we need to make sure we're doing that for the communities and the manufacturing base too. Doreen, I'll turn it back over to you, and looking forward to any questions that might be out there.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. And thank you all for your remarks. I appreciate you joining us to reflect as such. So happy to see any raised hands who would like to weigh in during a bit of Q&A. And while those hands are raised, I did want to ask Commissioner Reardon if your audio is fixed, any reflections you may have before we turn it to the rest of the council.
Thank you. Yes. Can you hear me? I think it's fixed. I can hear you.
Yep.
Good. I love technology. First of all, thank you to my union brothers for this presentation. As many of you know, I come out of labor, and workforce is a very important part of what we do at the Department of Labor, but it's also a very important part of what I care about in this entire climate action conversation. I think that you've all been eloquent about the problems that your members face, the communities that they live in. It's so important for us to hear from the people who actually do the work. A lot of times we listen to the theoreticians or the people with the white papers or whatever. I'm not talking about just climate. I'm talking about government in general. And too often we don't take time to listen to the people who are the real fabric of our economy. And that's the men and women who create the services and goods that keep the engines running and keep our economy afloat. You are all a very, very serious part of this conversation, and I'm really thrilled to have you here. A couple of things that really jumped out at me. Ken Slevin, well, first of all, Mario is eloquent about, why labor needs to be at the table and why it matters. And I'm so thrilled to have him here on the council as a partner. But to listen to each of you, Ken Slevin talked about preserving the knowledge and skills of the workers. I can tell you from my vantage point, and I know Doreen and I have talked about this from the Just Transition Working Group, that is one of the things we're really focused on, because the last thing we want to do is take the skills of these men and women who are currently working in the fossil fuel industries and flush them. We want to be able to transition them perhaps to green jobs in the same area, but I'm not necessarily, when I think about transition, I'm not necessarily thinking about taking Dave Wasura's brass smelting worker and turning them into a Tesla clean room person. That's not really smart workforce development. So there's going to be, I said Ken, I meant Jim. I'm sorry. I had an agent named Ken Slevin, so I keep calling you Ken. So, you know, we want to make sure that we understand the skills and opportunities that these workers have, and be able to think clearly about, you know, it's the triage, who's young, who's early enough in their career that they really can make a big transition, who's late enough in their career so that that transition is not so easy, and who's in the heart of their career and needs to maybe change their skill set but still stay in the industry. So I know this is a difficult conversation, but from my vantage point, those are things we think about every day. A couple of other things, the nightmare of NAFTA. So NAFTA had a very bad repercussion for working Americans, and partly because people did not sit down and talk about what the real outcome would be. And people felt shortchanged and overlooked and hoodwinked, frankly, for some people. That is not what we're trying to do here. Fortunately, the runway on clean energy is long enough. We can have some very robust conversations and really develop strong techniques so that those communities and those workers and their representatives are involved in those conversations every step of the way. Because again, we can't create our economy without the workers. You know, talking about the strategic success that's needed. So my days when I was the president of my union, we'd talk about organizing and what's that first organizing victory that's going to give the membership the understanding that there is success available, and then you can persevere towards the bigger target. I think that's what we're all talking about. So we need to make sure that we're very clear in our engagement, that we are very clear in our short, middle, and long-term goals. And those short-term goals need to be visible and replicable, because otherwise people will not have faith that we know what we're doing. I look forward to working with all of you, as I look forward to working with everybody else on the Climate Action Council, to making sure that this clean energy future is going to work for everybody. We all use energy to heat our homes and heat our water and drive our cars, or however we get around. We're all impacted by it one way or the other. But for the workforce that's actually in the current fossil economy, it's very, very personal. And I want to make sure that they understand that we're taking all of this into consideration, that we're going to make a plan that is available to people with as little pain. There's going to be pain, let's be really clear. But, you know, if somebody wants to go back to school, we want to make sure that it's a good fit. If somebody wants to leave an industry and go to another one, we want to make sure that that's a good choice. But above all, we want to make sure that our communities are sustained, that New York State's economy is vibrant, and that while we're doing that, our air becomes cleaner and cleaner.
Thank you very much for that. I see a number of hands raised. I'll just go in order on my screen, starting with Bob Howard, please. Bob, you have some questions or comments?
Yeah, both. Thank you, Doreen. And thank you to all of you who brought your voices today. It's a powerful, compelling story. We certainly have been paying attention to the jobs and workforce issues, but we need to do even a better job of that. And so your voices are important. I'm delighted that Mario has joined us on the council now. I think that's a very, very important move, and I look forward to working with him on it. I guess a question, and then I'm going to make a comment. The question, I don't think we've done a good enough job in the council of thinking through what the future of manufacturing in New York might look like. And you know, Dave, you mentioned green steel. You know, I follow that fairly closely. I see it's making big inroads, particularly in Sweden, a little bit in Germany. It's even picking up in India. As far as I know, no one's making green steel in the U.S. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but you know, can we identify these future technologies that the world needs and fill the lack of leadership that we see at the national level and push in New York for that? And maybe green steel isn't the best example. Maybe there are other examples, but I'm wondering from all of you who spoke today, if you have thoughts as to what new manufacturing we might be able to promote in New York as part of this. So that would be my question. My comment, I hear, several of you spoke to hydrogen and renewable natural gas, and I hear you for sure. I am a scientist. I work on hydrogen and renewable natural gas, and I have for a long time. And I'm just not as sanguine as what I'm hearing some of you think. So I'd love to, outside of this meeting today, talk with any of you further about what I see as some of the problems. Renewable natural gas, the issue is that the resource is really quite small, and it's a little bit more problematic than people might have thought 10 years ago. As far as I know, the Newtown Creek plant never came online, for instance. It's got some real technical challenges. So the council has not made decisions on either hydrogen or renewable natural gas. We have a working group that's working very, very hard with diverse voices on it. We're meeting every second week all summer to discuss it. And we certainly would welcome your voices as well. But again, my comment is I'm just not as sanguine as that. But my question is, do you see particular new manufacturing approaches that we might highlight within the state? Again, thank you for coming today.
Yeah, Bob, this is Dave from the Steelworkers. I guess just on you had mentioned green steel, and we are seeing that as we keep an eye on the industry overseas, where they're actually using carbon capture on steel mills. That is, obviously greatly helping the environmental aspects of making steel, which just, inherently is not the most environmentally friendly process that you can have. But I think there's a couple of things New York can do. I think there needs to be case study about what is going on, hands-on case study in some instances. I know we have working relationships across the globe with other industrial unions through Industrial currently, and then I think either New York or some sort of makeup of multi-state needs to take a look at some sort of pilot projects around advancing the technology, right? And I'm not saying I will be very happy to build a steel mill here in New York, but is there some existing manufacturing facilities that might be ripe for some sort of grant investment to test and move forward some of these new manufacturing practices? Or is there a way to attract business that's doing it overseas to come to New York or the Northeast Corridor using technology that's already there so it can be proven and worked on, right? And I think some sort of combination of both of those is what's going to get us further ahead. We can't sit back and say, oh, look, they're doing great stuff with that over here, overseas, great for them. We should probably try that and then wait 5 to 10 years because the technology is going to pass us by at that point. And the opportunities are going to pass us by. So I think further conversations about what could be possible as far as attracting that manufacturing into New York. And look, there's always conversation around, electric arc furnaces versus blast furnaces in the steel industry. That's, a shift in technology, which also means less jobs. So I think they're out there, but until we get serious about saying, look, we want to be that epicenter where it all starts here in the States, it's never going to happen. No different than we talk about with domestic supply chain, where we've worked with NYSERDA very closely in offshore wind. If something doesn't happen in the near term, we're going to look back and say, boy, we've missed that whole opportunity, much like England did with offshore wind, of not having any supply chain and everything being brought in. I think that's a real possibility, Bob.
Thank you for that.
Hey, Bob, if I may, I'm not too sure if we're not in a manufacturing union, but my biggest concern is keeping the current industries that we have in the state. I could tell you in the Port of LA, hydrogen is being really considered in the trucking industry, and batteries are great for electric vehicles. But when you start weighing down these trucks with batteries, they don't go as far and it just burns up. And hydrogen, they can get a lot longer distance. So in trying to bring products into the state so the state can manufacture or export products out of the state, I think we have to look at some kind of combination that actually fits all. It can't be just one fits all. It has to be looked at in all capacities. And where is the right place for it? Because I think that there is manufacturers that want to expand, but they're very afraid right now of making expansions.
That's a good point. Just a quick reply on the hydrogen. I agree with you that hydrogen has a role in big trucks, et cetera. But I don't see it to a pipeline system for heating, for example. So we need to be careful what the best use for hydrogen is. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Probably something we can talk about during the subgroups as well. But looking at the clock and moving on, why don't we go to Gavin next, please?
Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation and the honest discussion. This is about workforce development and workforce adjustments. I guess the question I have for labor is, it would be very helpful if maybe labor as a group or the commissioner can provide a list of, training programs that have worked that we could build upon, that maybe we could point to that have worked in the past for workers and worker training. And because we talk about the need to redevelop workers and develop their skill set, having the specific programs that work and have worked would be very helpful. The second point is something that I am very proud of is the partnership with labor, and in getting to the issue of, a lot of my colleagues talk about how important it is to reach the goals of the CLCPA of 0% by 2040. And I agree with that, but you can't get it and we can't achieve those goals without some other technology. And I was happy to hear folks talk about other technologies. And in the law, the term zero emission technologies is an undefined term in the CLCPA Act. And a petition that was put together with myself and labor is calling on the state to try to start a process to determine what those technologies are. So I just think it's really important, based on this conversation, that we use some of this momentum to have the PSC begin to actively look at that petition. So like Bob, mine's more of a question than a comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. One thing I will circulate actually after this meeting are some deliverables from the Just Transition Working Group, which was, really thinking about all of this, both with respect to what we've done historically in a successful manner and obviously looking to the future as to what types of programs would be necessary. So we can get those back around to the council. I think it was a pretty useful process, and some here today were represented on that working group. So thank you for that. Next up was Donna, please.
Thanks, Doreen. Thanks, everyone. Just a quick thank you. That's really all that I have. It's not even a question. It's a thank you for being here today. Thank you for your leadership on these issues. We're a Buffalo-based utility. I think you know who we are, National Fuel Gas, and we're about half union, IBEW, and I just feel like you elevated a lot of the comments that many of us heard at the public meetings, many of us there in person, many of you there in person as well. So it's just wonderful to hear the different viewpoints and then the focus that you have on transition, protecting our labor, our workforce, and doing all of this in a way that is on the right timeline with the right technology. And as you said, feasible for the economy. So just thank you very much for your leadership, and I look forward to working with you, and thanks for joining us on this council, Mario.
Thank you, Donna. Next up was Peter.
It looked like Dennis was before me, so I don't want to get in Dennis's way if he still has.
I'm sorry. You can tell why Sarah usually does this. All right, sure. Let's go to Dennis. I see him now. Sorry, at the top of my list. Sorry, Dennis.
Thank you, Doreen. Yeah, I just want to also express my appreciation for the very candid but balanced feedback from this group. And I know this is about workforce, but what I'd like to maybe have you guys think about and maybe help us to formulate an appreciation for, we mentioned Huntley, we mentioned steel sites that are out there. Well, they joined thousands of other Rust Belt neighborhoods that happen to be also disadvantaged communities. So do you see climate change acting enough on behalf of economic development? I know we talk about offshore wind, but I'm more referencing not just repurposing or replacing the job function of today's worker, but there's really opportunity for new business, new green energy technologies that are out there, both on the construction side. But what I'm really focused in and like to get your feedback on is somewhat where Bob was going, is on the manufacturing side. Are we doing enough in your eyes to elevate New York as the future home of a green energy ecosystem?
Well, I'm going to jump in real quickly, if you don't mind, Gary LaBarbera. I mean, Dave really is the one that can really speak to manufacturing more than I. But what I will say, as it relates to construction, there is an opportunity here for an enormous amount of manufacturing regarding, even with the manufacturing for the turbines, et cetera. And I'm personally not sure where that stands. I mean, Doreen, you probably have a better sense. I will say this. In my meeting that I had with Equinor, last 2 weeks ago, I was informed that there are some issues now at the Port of Albany. Am I correct in that? That could slow down the process. I mean, I know they're planning on doing some manufacturing there. But I mean, look, I think there's an enormous opportunity for manufacturing. That's one of the reasons why, when we negotiated in the budget originally, the labor standards, we not only included, the Buy American piece, but we included that there would be an incentive for buying manufactured products or components from New York State manufacturing facilities. And the hope was to incentivize, some interest in that. I mean, I know there is some interest that I'm aware of, but I'm not sure how broad it is. But I think I'm just saying, you're asking if we're doing enough. I can't give you an answer whether it's enough or not enough, but what I can say is I think there's an enormous opportunity here. And if we miss it, we're going to lose that opportunity to, other parts of the world for manufacturing. I mean, I don't know, Doreen, if you want to comment on what I was informed of. I didn't call you on it. I know that, but there was some issues. I think that I was going to call Kevin at EDC. There was some permitting issues or something. You aware of that?
Yes, certainly. There's been some media coverage specifically around the activity at the port, not directly related to our contract, but certainly, it's, I guess, as a general matter, I completely agree with you, Gary, that and to answer your question, perhaps, Dennis, when we think about goals like those that we've established under the Climate Act, to me, it's implicit in saying that when you establish goals of that magnitude, and it really is, as an example in offshore wind, it's a nation leading goal, that, that affords us the opportunity to really realize the level of commitment that we're now seeing as an example in the offshore wind industry. Because by providing that market durability and the scale and the duration of those commitments, that's when you see interests in manufacturing taking hold. Another great example is the heat pump industry. On the building side, now we're taking interest from these companies that have set up originally in the European markets, where there is also a similar commitment. Now it's beginning to make sense for them to look at establishing manufacturing here in the States to fulfill commitments like that of New York's. So all that to say, that's part of the equation. It's that recipe, and the projects that result from them obviously need to advance and be constructed and operate, but that's part of the value we're looking to achieve. I see we have 5 minutes, so let's move on with Peter and Raya, please.
Doreen, just before we do move on, Dennis, I want to just raise up Doreen and the group at NYSERDA. Are we doing enough? I don't know. I don't know if the manufacturers in the United States are doing enough to invest in this technology. I don't know if we're having the right conversations, but I can say this. Every time we think we're coming close to, you know, a goal or a marker and it gets pushed back, NYSERDA has been there with us to say, okay, then how do we fix this? Look, Gary had talked about getting Buy American provisions put into the budget for renewables. Okay, that was great. We didn't rest on those laurels. We got together and really had to iron out some tough conversations that needed to happen. So New York State was right there to have those conversations. When they've made adjustments that we thought that they needed to make, they've come back to us and say, okay, what do you think about this? Will this help out your membership? And we've either said, yeah, absolutely, wow, you guys went further than we thought, or no, you need to go a little bit further. And the simple answer to the first question of can New York State be a hub or an incubator, that's been my goal. And I don't think there's really anything. I see Doreen kind of smile because I say it all the time. There's really nothing stopping from New York State from being able to do it. And the partnership between the manufacturing side and the state, I think, is there and growing to push us in that direction.
Doreen, the only reason I mentioned Huntley and these steel sites is that it's nice to talk like this, but we've got to bring infrastructure and electric capacity to those sites, or we're not going to optimize benefits to our disadvantaged communities, especially in traditional Rust Belt. These are good ideas, good thoughts, but we got to do the block and tackle first.
Yep, that's couldn't agree more. I guess I'll leave it at that as we pivot over to Peter.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for the good presentations, and thanks for the discussion. It feels a little bit like an extension of the hearings that we held across the state, but this was specific to one particular topic. So with that, I would love for the reps that were on with us today, if you've submitted comments, written comments into the hearing, I would love personally to get them directly. I know they're going into a site, and at the risk of all the participants who are on that don't yet have my email address, here's the best email address to send me those comments. It's PM Iwanowitz. Hopefully you can grab my last name off the screen right now at gmail.com. I'd love to get, whatever written comments the labor has submitted on these topics. There's a lot of different ground covered. I have one quick question for Dave specifically. You talked about net zero, and I'm wondering if your union or the other brothers and sisters in labor have looked at a provision in the environmental conservation law that was written into the CLCPA allowing for an alternative compliance mechanism. Do you have a recommendation one way or the other whether the state should opt into that, or have you not looked at that program in great detail? Because I think it does get into the whole issue of netting out emissions.
Yeah, me personally, no, Peter, but I can absolutely talk to our state policy director out of DC who is dissecting the whole bill, and I know we'll have an opinion on it as we move forward, and I get back to you.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting provision that's been around for 3 years, and we just haven't had a lot of discussion in the Just Transition Working Group or elsewhere whether that should be something that the DEC executes as the statute provides.
Yeah, and look, from the original, from the original bill to the CLCPA, it did move from zero carbon emissions to net zero. So that over the last however long has primarily been our focus to make sure that gets held up, A, moved, and then B, held up as we move forward.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. I'm not sure. I mean, I think the original statute all along was for the electricity sector to be zero emissions. The governor injected some things in early 2019 that was rejected by the legislature. So the electricity sector in that final agreement amongst the parties was to reflect it as zero emissions, but not carbon neutral. Thanks, Doreen.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
Utility workers, we've looked at it. I mean, we keep getting, as the whole state looks at a lot of things, but I mean, a lot of our emissions are coming from buildings, and just focusing on those power generation and electric sectors are very tough. So we haven't really balanced it out in any way.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I appreciate that. I just want to make note for everybody, especially the participants listening on that alternative compliance mechanism is not something that would be applicable to the power sector. It's just for those hard to electrify industries on a short-term basis if we needed to go down that pathway at all. But as Bob Howarth indicates, we may not have to go down that pathway.
Thanks, Peter. And last up, Raya, please.
Thank you so much. I wanted to thank all of you for coming and speaking with us today. I appreciated the remarks and also what I heard to be a commitment and an understanding about the importance of jobs and equity. Leadership in New York can and will mean real concrete benefits, as our own cost-benefit analysis of this council's cost-benefit analysis has shown. So my question is, how can we best work together with all of you to accomplish a really bold win-win vision to achieve our climate equity and workforce goals that we know we can accomplish in New York?
Well, I mean, I think this is the beginning of that process. I think, you know, as Doreen has said, you know, most of, if not all of us on the panel today, you know, we've been very interactive with the state and with NYSERDA. And you know, I also want to, you know, just give another shout out to Doreen and the whole team and Commissioner Reardon. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations on the subcommittee, and pleased to be here today. But I really just think that the fact that, you know, now we do have Mario, you know, on the Climate Action Council, that's a big step in keeping the lines of communication open. I know from, you know, the building trades point of view, you know, we are very open, you know, as the others on this call has expressed, to work collaboratively and to accomplish, you know, the multiple goals that we have an opportunity to accomplish. One is, again, is addressing the climate, and the other obviously is protecting a good middle class careers and jobs, and creating opportunity for underserved communities. So I just think if there is open lines of communication, and, you know, Mario now being on the Climate Action Council certainly, you know, leads to that process. I think that's how we do it. And I think we can collaborate on a lot of issues to satisfy the multiple goals that I think we all have an interest to accomplish. So that's my thought anyway.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Raya, for the question, and it is one that is really the core of our need here in coming together to move initiatives forward, right? That makes sense in the context of our broader state goals and the people who work within it. So with that said, I certainly do want to thank you, Gary, Jim, Pete, and Dave for joining us, for not only your thoughts, but for the dialogue that I hope we can continue in various forums. So on behalf of my co-chair and the council, thank you again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and be well, everyone. Mario, I'll talk to you soon, I'm sure. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Take care, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah.
With that, I'll turn it over to my co-chair for the next topic. Basil?
Maureen, thanks. So how are we doing on time, by the way? Tighter?
We're good on time. I was wrapped up by 3:30. I guess I'm 3 minutes over. Not bad.
Not bad. Great. All right. Well, transitioning over to our barriers and opportunities report. DEC, NYSERDA, and NYPA have been hard at work on that, along with many of you. So let's just jump right into it. Samir, our climate justice advisor, is going to walk us through. Samir, are you on?
Great. Yep, I'm on.
Okay, take it away, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. It's really great to see all of you. For the record, my name is Samir Ranade, Climate Justice Advisor. My presentation will cover a component of your upcoming work that is vital to climate justice. This is the Climate Act's requirement to amend the final version of the scoping plan with the recommendations of the Barriers and Opportunities Report. At its core, This will ensure that state agency and authority staff have the tools, knowledge, and guidance necessary to deliver the most just and socially beneficial outcomes as they work to execute the scoping plan. The Climate Act required NYSERDA, DEC, and NYPA to produce this report. It was completed and submitted to the governor and legislature on January 1st of this year and posted to DEC's website. I know a lot has happened since then, so I'll give a refresher on the substance, methodology, and goals of the report, and an update on the ongoing work and next steps. Next slide, please. So the task of the report was to identify the barriers to and opportunities for increasing access and ownership in disadvantaged communities to the 5 service and commodity areas on this slide. They are distributed renewable energy generation, energy efficiency and weatherization, zero and low emissions transportation options, adaptation measures to improve the resilience of homes and infrastructure, other services and infrastructure to reduce risks associated with climate-related hazards, and acting on the recommendations would improve the design and implementation of all the relevant New York State-led activities and programs under the Climate Act that fall in these areas. This would maximize their value in serving disadvantaged communities by yielding greater benefits from the effort. I also want to highlight that the requirement to focus on the barriers and opportunities in the area of resilience to climate hazards will ensure that disadvantaged communities also receive priority consideration in climate adaptation efforts. This covers things like coordination between different jurisdictions of governments and community organizations, and includes programs that realize the value of natural ecosystem services to protect human health and well-being. As such, the task of embedding the report's recommendations into the scoping plan is critical to an effective and comprehensive approach to achieving climate justice, ensuring that every New Yorker meaningfully benefits from state actions that support clean energy and the protection of our environment from degradation and climate change. Next slide, please. This slide offers a quick review of how the report was could you go back up one more to the methodology slide? Let's see. Okay, it may not be on there, but I can just go ahead and articulate. This is just the methodology of how the report was created. So as I previously noted, NYSERDA, DEC, and NYPA led the work. NYSERDA contracted with Illum Advising and Industrial Economics to perform the research activities and prepare the report. The research activities included actions like we did significant secondary research, looking at what other states were doing. We held 8 focus groups, 2 public hearings, a public comment period. We got input from the Climate Justice Working Group, and we engaged with an active interagency study group. And as I'll touch on at the end of my presentation, I just want to emphasize that our work on studying the barriers and opportunities and implementing the optimal solutions will always be ongoing as evolving circumstances require updated actions. Next slide, please. So the report identified 4 categories of barriers to access and ownership, as you can see on the slide. I'll briefly describe what each of these are. Physical and economic structures and conditions. This is where the baseline conditions of physical and economic structures can impede access, use, or ownership of programs or solutions. Financial and knowledge resources and capacity barriers. This is defined by insufficient resources. They could be a lack of proper financing or not enough time to learn what's available. And specifically at the agency and organizational level, it could be a lack of staffing capacity. Next is perspective and information barriers. This includes limited information, competing priorities and preferences, and lived experiences and historical patterns of mistreatment that have been.
Samir, hang on one sec. It seems like somebody's not on mute. Can you all go on mute? Thank you.
Thanks. This is limited information, competing priorities and preferences, and the lived experiences and historical patterns of mistreatment that have eroded trust and made it difficult for communities to be aware of and gain access to programs and services. Lastly, there are programmatic design and implementation barriers. This is related to a lack of alignment between agencies that results in data and knowledge gaps and program design constraints. The report provides a table for each of these categories that further breaks them down, which I'll turn to next. And next slide, please. Each category of barriers has 3 to 6 specific barriers. The report explains how the barriers apply at different scales. These include the individual and household level, the community level, and the landlord and business level. To illustrate, this slide is a snippet of the table on the programmatic design and implementation barrier. In the 2 rows, you can see specific barriers identified and how they apply at each scale, as well as the affected service and commodity areas in the last column, which in the case of both is all areas. The value of identifying the barriers at this level of detail is that state efforts can be tailored to remove barriers as they affect different types of stakeholders which have unique needs and roles. For example, in the top row, showing that program eligibility constraints and application requirements may eliminate certain communities from participation at the community level scale, which includes community serving organizations as well as governments. The report found that competitive grant structures may unduly favor organizations with grant writing capacity. At the landlord/business scale level, the report found that loan programs aren't accessible to small cash-based businesses and that application requirements favor firms with resources. In some cases, the same type of barrier may exist at different levels. Like you can see in the second row, where the barrier of ineffective outreach was identified to be the same at both the individual and landlord/business level of not providing information about programs and services in the best manner. Knowing this could help efficiently develop a baseline approach to removing certain barriers that apply at multiple scales. And now onto the solutions. Next slide, please. The report identified 8 different high-level recommendations to increase access and ownership. Each recommendation stems from one of 3 themes, which I'll describe to give a sense of the recommended opportunities. The first theme is to ensure inclusive processes. This theme focuses on creating deep, meaningful relationships with community members. It would improve how our state engages communities in rulemakings and other public proceedings where input is necessary, as well as during informal processes. So there's an active, open line of communication between state staff and community members, thus allowing programs to be designed and updated to reflect the latest circumstances. The second theme is streamline program access. This focuses on making state programs more user-friendly. It recognizes that community members have limited resources and competing priorities, so it encourages the state to fix this with actions such as switching to automatic enrollment in programs, communicating information more clearly, eliminating duplicative application requirements, and increasing information sharing among agencies and authorities to make application processes efficient and easier for the public. It also suggests ways for the state to act as a more effective conduit between federal and local government interactions and to improve coordination in general between all government jurisdictions within the state. The third theme is to address emerging issues. This theme would empower community members to have useful tools to share information and support each other during climate emergencies, and to report on problems like sewer overflows, brittle trees, or a health vulnerable neighbor to the right channels. It could also focus the state on the intersection of environmental and housing policy with revamped efforts to address the health and safety of buildings, greater action to build a robust energy code workforce of frontline contractors, and to design adaptation strategies that avoid displacement and foster stronger community bonds. Next slide, please. The 8 recommendations were presented as high-level principles. Stemming from each of those recommendations are opportunities. These opportunities are tangible actions the state can take to realize the principles and remove the barriers. This slide is an example of just one of the recommendations from the theme Ensure Inclusive Processes. It has 4 opportunities. In total, the report identifies 35 unique opportunities that flow from the collection of 8 recommendations and 3 themes. So right now, we're starting to conduct an assessment of these opportunities. Our goal is to identify how they apply, what is required to execute on them, and where are they already being acted upon. To the extent practicable, we can start implementing these recommendations now. And while this work is underway, there are obviously several reasons why it is important to codify these recommendations by including them in the scoping plan. As the Climate Act places climate justice front and center with acting on climate, prescribing these opportunities in the scoping plan will provide a clear intent and strategy to achieve that objective. In addition, your input on how it is included within the plan will also help earn the buy-in from each of you and the important public stakeholders and constituencies that you represent. So this brings me to the next steps of the report. Next slide, please. The journey of the recommendations is divided into 3 phases of work that we expect to take on in order to implement them. The phases are assessment, implementation, and continued assessment and refinement. Given their potential complexity, the individual timeline for each recommendation may vary considerably, and the steps we're taking overlap all 3 phases to some degree. Some recommendations are already being implemented, while others are still at the very beginning stages of being introduced and evaluated. I also want to note that we can make this report a living document and constantly update it as dictated by evolving circumstances and new information. As we work through the assessment and implementation phases, we'll continue engagement with community members in various channels to make sure we have the latest insights and awareness and work collectively to address the barriers and capture the solutions. These community members will include the Climate Justice Working Group, as well as other organizations that serve or represent disadvantaged communities. The work that we're doing across these phases now will be translated into refined ideas and strategies, which we'll present to you for consideration in amending the scoping plan with the recommendations. Next slide, please. So let me quickly describe the phases. In phase 1, we'll sort recommendations by implementing agency and priority with regards to their immediate feasibility and expected magnitude of impact. We started to conduct an inventory of the barriers to see exactly how they apply to relevant programs, which would enable program staff to calibrate the recommendations accordingly. We're also evaluating program initiatives and coordination structures that embody these recommendations and put them into action now, or those that could be modified to do so. The structures include bodies that facilitate interagency collaboration and data sharing, like the Low Income Energy Task Force and the Interagency Climate Adaptation and Resilience Work Group. The initiatives include efforts that involve creating close partnerships with community members to design programs, deliver services, and solve problems. Just to name a few, NYSERDA's Energy Equity Collaborative and Clean Energy Hubs, DEC's air monitoring program and climate smart communities and extreme heat action plan fit the description of these types of initiatives. Crucially, in phase one, we're working to understand the current effectiveness of our clean energy and climate resilience programs in serving disadvantaged communities, and we'll set measurable goals to achieve by the end of this year to improve community access and ownership. And I'm almost done. Next slide, please. So with phases 2 and 3, once the assessment is completed, the recommendation moves into phase 2 of implementation. Here we'll document the experience and results for further analysis and potential refinement. Phase 3 involves developing a reporting plan to include as part of the Climate Act's implementation reporting the systems, tools, and techniques that we use to thoughtfully design programs and meticulously track their progress with a constant eye towards improvement is part of our broader objective to create a high standard of living across every community in New York through ambitious and socially beneficial climate action. The recommendations in this report will optimize the realization of those benefits and, over time, a key benchmark to measure our effectiveness in delivering these programs will be the progress our state has made in reducing the disparities represented by the criteria for disadvantaged communities. So in the next few weeks, we'll develop a proposal for you to consider in how to integrate the recommendations. And in the meantime, I just want to emphasize that I'm available to meet with each of you one-on-one to discuss the content and next steps of the report. So please feel free to reach out to me anytime if you have questions, ideas, or concerns. And thank you so much for your dedicated leadership and attention to this matter. And with that, I'll turn it back. Thank you.
Samir, thank you so much. Any questions for Samir before we move on? Okay. Well, take him up on it. You know where to find him. If you have any questions for him or any of us on this, please do reach out.
I raised my hand with the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't see you. Go ahead, Raya.
That's all right.
Yeah, I see Dennis as well.
Oh, all right.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Samir. I will take you up on that one-on-one meeting. It's really not a question, just that, this really sounds like fantastic progress, and just another, the more we dig into this, the more we see that these are these issues, these like rubber meets the road community-based issues that are going to get us where we need to be. And if we talk about disadvantaged communities, we're really talking about a huge percentage of our population in our most, hardest to decarbonize areas. And so this is really the meat and potatoes, the vegetarian meat and potatoes. And I just wanted to thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. I look forward to connecting with you.
Dennis, and then Donna.
Samir, thank you. And I also will take you up on the individual meeting. I'm just trying to understand, maybe this is another group, but categories of barriers. You don't mention infrastructure or local capacity in which to decarbonize or to even revitalize a given community, yet we're looking for opportunities for communities to take more ownership or get more involved, perhaps from a distributed energy resource level. And then in saying that, I don't see Empire State Development, Department of Labor involved in kind of like how this all could equate to not only local opportunity for jobs, but really an opportunity to attract and be part of the economic activity of that given community. So that's what if that's not appropriate here, that's what I'd like to talk to you about.
Great. Yeah, that sounds good, Dennis. I'll just quickly say physical and economic structures. Physical structures meant infrastructure. And let's dig into the table because it does talk about local workforce constraints. And obviously, as a member of working for the Climate Action Council, I'm working with DOL and ESD and every state agency on this to ensure that we address those local workforce gaps. But yeah, I look forward to talking with you more about that.
I just noticed that you highlighted the DEC, NYSERD, and NYPA, but you didn't highlight one of the key objectives of the climate action or the Climate Act, and that is jobs. So that was my observation.
And that was only because those three agencies were the ones who were required by the Climate Act to write the report. That's why, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. Donna.
Thank you. Thanks, Basil. Just real fast, Samir, I also will take you up on that opportunity. I'd love to talk offline, but my interest is going to be in the areas you spoke about with building stock that's older and in disrepair, and then landlord situations. It's been a challenge for us to get energy efficiency into some of those buildings and some of those, doubles in an old kind of Rust Belt area, as Dennis likes to call it. So really interested in how we can work together on that, because I think those are going to be hard sectors to decarbonize, and so interested in your ideas. So I'll send you a note.
Great. Thanks, I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Okay, Doreen, I think that closes us out. On to you.
Yes, thank you, Samir, for that presentation. If we turn to the next slide, I'd like to hand I think there was one more, sorry. There we go. I'd like to hand the meeting over to Sarah Osgood, as we had said, to provide an update on where we are with our public comments. Sarah?
Thanks, Doreen. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I'm not prepared to speak substantively about the comments that have been received because we are still processing them. But I did want to bring you an update as to where we are and what to expect, and then answer any questions that you might have. So in total, the council has received approximately 35,000 sets of comments during the 6 months of open comment period. Clearly, this is quite significant, and we expect it will take a bit of time to get through. But I will also mention that there's a number of those comments that were received by email that also appear to be duplicates or what we'd consider form letters, where the main body of the message may be identical or largely similar to others. And I would say, based on our initial assessments, we believe it could be as many as 25,000 comments or so could be duplicates. So we're working our way through these. The plan is to bring an initial summary of the comments to the council by the next council meeting, which we're aiming for August. We can also provide council members with direct access to view some of the comments that have come in via the online comment portal. Due to the volume of comments that have come in via email and hard copy, we need a bit more time to process those. But our priority here is to work through all the comments received, provide a feedback by topic area to the council. Then, based on the council discussions, staff can then kind of take that feedback back, and we can then propose approaches to address the comments within the final scoping plan. Once we get this done, and not necessarily completely in series, but we also need to process the comments for posting them publicly. Again, this is not going to be an insignificant effort due to the volume. And we must redact certain information, like personal or sensitive information, prior to posting the comments. So that's really just the quick high-level update that I wanted to provide on the written comments at this point in time. But I imagine folks might have some questions, so I'd be happy to take those as well. And Raya, I see that you have your hand up.
Legacy hand.
Oh, sorry. Any questions from Councilman Dennis? I see your hands up.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Doreen. Yes, sir. I missed that point you made about. Did you say that there was X amount of them that were more form letter or repetitive, and then you gave a number of those that were more kind of like redundant or repetitive?
Yep. So we're still processing all of this. So these are kind of preliminary numbers, but based on our initial estimates, approximately 25,000 of the emails appear to be duplicates. So that doesn't mean that they're less important or less meaningful, but it would mean that, you know, for instance, an organization might draft a set of talking points and post them somewhere and send out information to their membership suggesting that, you know, their members submit the same comment as well. And so it's basically just as we're reviewing these, we want to make sure that we're reviewing all of the comments, the unique comments closely and so that we're, you know, that we can kind of consider everything that is there, but we also are trying to not have, you know, for council members that are interested in looking directly at the comments, we're trying to make it a little bit more organized for you so you don't find yourself reading, you know, 5,000 emails that are all essentially identical. And so yes, we still need to do a little bit more processing there to have to get those materials ready for you.
Bless you, by the way.
Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Bob, if I could, and I agree, bless you. This seems like a monumental task. I appreciate that you're not just going to throw in the 25,000 repeats, but it would be useful to, you know, put numbers on it as you do it, so we can get some sense of how many people actually weighed in. And just out of curiosity, you said that you'll have to redact personal information and all. I would presume that whatever people put in is they put in publicly. So can you just elaborate on the necessity of that? It seems to me you've got a huge challenge as it is, so I'm not sure why that's a priority, but I'm not a lawyer, so please inform me.
Sure.
Thank you.
I am also not a lawyer, but I have been, I don't know if I'd say brief. I've been in conversations with them. As I understand it, we typically do not publish email addresses, phone numbers, and physical addresses. And so we'd want to redact that information. Really, it's just a protection. So if, you know, if somebody's they're unhappy with your comments, it's just, you know, for safety reasons. I will say there's also a number of comments where, you know, people are passionate about this issue on both sides or not even both sides, on multiple sides of the issues. And in some cases, they use language that we would want to redact from putting up on a public government website. And so there's, they require careful review.
Okay, thank you for that, and good luck with this monumental task. I don't envy you at all.
All right, I'm not seeing any additional hands at this point. So I think back over to you, Doreen.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Thanks for that update. If we turn to the next slide, we'll turn to our final agenda item, which is the report out from our subgroups. So as we will all recall, when we formed the subgroups at earlier council meetings this year, we committed to providing report outs from each at our future CAC meetings. And specifically, these report outs are intended to keep the full council and the interested public apprised of the work that has been conducted by the subgroups. Certainly for the council to ask any questions of the subgroup. And if a subgroup is looking for specific guidance from the council, they would bring forth those requests here. So these subgroups have each met several times and are working toward their deliverables of proposed recommendations for the full council to consider later this summer and into the fall. And so here today, I have 3 leaders of those subgroups to provide those updates, starting with Maureen Letty from DEC for Alternative Fuels, Jessica Waldorf from the Department of Public Service for Gas System Transition, and Jared Snyder from the Department of Environmental Conservation for economy-wide policies. So first, I'll hand the presentation over to Maureen.
Thank you, Doreen. Next slide, please. And very happy to be reporting out on the progress on the alternative fuel subgroup. It's a really good group and they've been doing a lot of great work. They We've had 3 meetings so far to date. Our 4th is scheduled for this Wednesday. And in those meetings, we have set forth a work plan, which you can see up here on this slide. We have looked at the use of alternative fuels in the integration analysis and the strategies from the advisory panels that are in the draft scoping plan. The group has agreed on definitions for alternative fuels. And we looked at health, co-pollutant, and equity consideration, and using that basis of information have started to develop assessment criteria by which the group is going to evaluate the strategies that are in the draft plan now. And these assessment criteria are still in draft form, as the group still has quite a lot of work to do. So the ultimate end product of the alternative fuels group is to develop these agreed upon shared criteria that will be a lens through which the group will review how these fuels and their uses are characterized in the draft plan as it's written today, and then offer suggested revisions to bring forth to this full council for consideration. And I'll note that this work plan too it's open to some flexibility. Agenda items might move around, things might change. We have put in our expected report outs to the CAC in August and September. Those meetings obviously have not yet been scheduled. So these things are flexible to some degree, but this is the schedule that we intend to proceed with in order to have final recommended revisions to the draft plan language to the council in September. Next slide, please. So these are the alternative fuels definitions that the group has come to agreement on. This is not a comprehensive list of every alternative fuel in existence, but these are the fuels that the group is going to be looking at and considering as we do our work. And we're sharing these with the CAC today. We're happy to take feedback on these from the council on these definitions, and the subgroup will consider any feedback or reactions from the larger council when we meet as a group this coming Wednesday. So we lumped our fuels roughly by source, with waste-derived biofuels versus crop-derived biofuels, which are merely thinking about food crops and the trade-offs there, and then different types of hydrogen. So we have waste-derived fuels for renewable jet fuel, renewable natural gas, wood-based bioenergy, a bit of a kind of a broader categorization that was part of the bioeconomy section in the draft scoping plan, biodiesel, renewable diesel, and cellulosic ethanol from waste sources versus similar fuels but are from crop-derived sources such as food crop-based ethanol or oilseed crop-based biodiesel, oilseed crop-based renewable diesel. And we also looked at hydrogen and 2 main forms of hydrogen. One, green hydrogen, which we know of as being formed through using a renewable electricity that has no greenhouse gas emissions, or very, very few, if any. And the new definition was added for low carbon intensity hydrogen, which is meant to align with definitions in the Federal Jobs and Infrastructure Act around a low carbon intensity hydrogen. And so that's where the definition evolved there. I know it's a lot of words on the slide right here, but this information will be provided to the whole group obviously afterwards, and we can take feedback from the council at any time. And next slide, please. And our third piece of work that we're sharing today are where we are so far with developing assessment criteria. We've had some good discussions about the lens through which the group wants to evaluate the uses of alternative fuels, the fuel plus use as they're described in the plan. But they are subject to further evolution as we continue to receive more information, and particularly as the group considers the public comment when that is ready to be shared with the group. So we have organized these as a simple kind of yes/no threshold criteria that then are followed up with more complex. And we also have to move from a question statement to a more declarative statement on how we can use these more effectively when we're actually looking at words on the page. So that is where we are as of today. As I said, the group has been doing really great work, and I'm happy to receive any feedback that we can then take back at our next meeting. I can't see any hands up, so I'm going to rely on maybe Sarah to tell me if anybody's raising hands.
It looks like Bob Howarth's hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. And Maureen, thank you for that. That's a great summary. Can you go back just one slide? I want to just add a little bit of clarification, perhaps, or 2 slides. Is that possible? Yeah,
So
right there.
that one?
On the low carbon intensity hydrogen, you said that this is in response to the new federal definition, which is true. In the bipartisan infrastructure bill from last year, the feds defined a low carbon intensity hydrogen. So we agreed to look at it, and 2 kilograms of CO2 equivalents is what they agreed to. But I want to just emphasize for the group that calculated pursuant to CLCPA is really important, because at the federal level, the legislation says it's subject to the normal DOE REIT model interpretation, which uses the 100-year global warming potential instead of a 20-year, and it also specifies what the federals use for methane emissions. And so the accounting we're using in New York puts a heavier emphasis on methane and a heavier emphasis on the time frame. So I just want everyone to be clear that if we follow through here and do this pursuant to the CLCPA, it's not at all what the feds will describe as low intensity hydrogen.
Thank you, Bob. That's an important distinction.
Thank you.
I see Raya's also got her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Looks like folks have been very busy and accomplishing a lot. I just want to mention, I know that, I've expressed concern at previous Climate Action Council meetings about sort of not duplication, potentially duplicity, between the gas transition group and this group with regard to some of the fuels. And so, and I see they're going to be, there's some forking in terms of how these are going to be looked at. And it looks like there are good conversations happening in each group. But I just wanted to emphasize the importance of coordination and I guess ask again, what are your plans for making sure that we are in sync in these 2 groups?
Yep, that's a good point. Yeah, there's a fair bit of crossover with the gas system transition. And so we had looking alternative fuels. So the way I see the crossover is we're looking at fuels plus use, and there can be an overlap there with fuels plus use as it is a use in the gas system. So the gas system transition is developing a framework through which a planning process would be informed, and we'll be looking at the fuel plus use to meet satisfying these criteria. But yes, we will coordinate and make sure that those 2 groups are working together and not at cross purpose.
Yeah, and yes, I think well, it's an interesting interpretation. I don't necessarily disagree with, but yes, that's the core of my question: is how will we work together? Because they're just different angles that it's being coming at, and there's some duplication of folks and voices on both, but not complete.
Yep. Yes, and I think that's going to become as we go in later into our meetings, once we get to a final set of assessment criteria, we'll bring those forward to the council at a meeting for the council to see and review and respond to. And I'd say, Raya, probably after that point is where we'll really start to have some really good cross-pollination between the gas system transition subgroup.
All right, forgive me. What's the timing? You mean when you come? I'm just because we've got precious few weeks. Ideally we'd be able to have some feedback happen before things were concretized.
It's if you go back to the work plan slide, I think 2 backwards, we do have a time frame where yeah, that's perfect. We look to finalize our assessment criteria the 27th of July, so the next meeting. So at that point, whenever the August CAC meeting is, if it's prior to August 10th, and that's where we will look to set those final assessment criteria forward with the CAC for, for feedback.
All right. I think it ideally, I mean, I know there's a tremendous amount of train conducting going on here, but ideally we'd be able to have, so even if it was material share,
Sure.
before the next CAC meeting, I think is a suggestion.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Any other hands that you can see, Sarah?
I am not seeing any other hands at this point.
Well, great. Thank you. And if our slide driver wants to move forward, I will pass it over to Jessica Waldorf, who's the Chief of Staff and Director of Policy Implementation at the Department of Public Service, and is going to give the report out for the gas system transition.
Great. Thank you, Maureen. So I lead the gas system transition subgroup, and the slide here provides an overview of the work that we've done to date. We've met 3 times since early June, and here, outlines a summary of some of the key topics we've discussed in those meetings, as well as topics for future meetings within our work plan, which, similar to what Maureen said, may be adjusted as our work continues. And to the point that you just raised, Raya, we did have, a plan at a future meeting to talk about the role of alternative fuels and the crossover between our 2 groups. But we can certainly talk about, adjusting some of the timing there. And that might be something we consider as a group. Some of the progress we've made here includes reviewing the subgroup charge and development of the work plan. And as a reminder, the purpose of this work group is to develop a framework through which agencies can develop a coordinated plan for the orderly downsizing of the gas system. The framework will include recommendations for this coordinated plan to reduce emissions from the gas system through a transition that is equitable, cost-effective, and maintains system safety and reliability. The subgroup has developed a matrix of key considerations for this framework in its draft form and created an inventory of resources on what other states and jurisdictions are doing on gas transition. The subgroup has had discussions on several of the framework's key considerations, including safety, reliability, affordability, and just transition, as well as a recent presentation from the Utility Consultation Group, where they discussed these topics and shared their perspective. Upcoming meetings will be focused on additional discussion of key considerations and development of this framework. And with that, next slide, please. This is a draft list of the key considerations for the framework, and as you can see, the considerations hit on a wide variety of issues related to gas transition, including energy affordability, reliability and safety of the energy delivery systems, equity, both in terms of access to heating alternatives, prioritization of emissions and co-pollutant reductions, and ensuring no disproportionate impacts to disadvantaged communities. Other topics include just transition, consideration of health impacts, a communication strategy and consumer education plan, and the need to include a detailed timeline for the transition. The detailed timeline would align with the scoping plan's recommendations and give clarity to labor, workforce, local governments, utilities, community groups, disadvantaged communities, and consumers on what the transition means and when. And at this point, I'll keep my overview brief, but certainly welcome any feedback from the council members today that we can take back to our next meeting, and we'll of course incorporate council feedback as the work of this subgroup continues. Thank you. And Sarah, I can't see any hands either, but
Yep.
let me know if anything.
I'm not seeing any hands. Are there any questions or comments for Jessica and the gas system transition subgroup? All right, I'm not seeing any. So let's go to the next slide and we'll turn it over to Jared Snyder to give an overview of economy-wide policies subgroup.
All right, thanks, Sarah. So the economy-wide policy subgroup has held 2 meetings in the last 2 weeks. We accomplished 3 things at those meetings, or the subgroup accomplished 3 things. One was approving the work plan going forward for the upcoming meetings. Second was refining and prioritizing the criteria that the council had developed in prior meetings. And then third, we heard from Resources for the Future, an independent economic research organization with a lot of expertise in this space. And they provided a detailed report about their research into the experience with these types of economy-wide policies in different jurisdictions, and then also bringing to bear some of their own expertise on some of the questions that the subgroup is facing. So that presentation by Resources for the Future will help inform what comes in the next meeting, which is applying the criteria developed to the 3 types of economy-wide programs under consideration. As you recall, those are carbon pricing, cap and invest, and a clean energy supply standard. So the next meeting will finalize the group will finalize the criteria, and then over the next 3 meetings apply the criteria to those policies. In the third meeting, the focus will be on the criteria that relate to emissions. You know, how does these various policies, how would they reduce emissions? The second meeting on the 25th will focus on equity, the equity implications and opportunities under the various 3 types of programs under consideration. And then the meeting 5 in early August will focus on the economic criteria. And then once that is done, then there'll be a comprehensive discussion about the rationale for implementing an economy-wide program, and that's really where the subgroup members will sort of identify their preferences and their views on whether an economy-wide program is needed. That will also be informed by public comment that has come in the meantime. And there's an opportunity for a potential additional meeting if one is needed, but otherwise the goal would be to finalize the recommendations by early September to present to the council. So that's a quick summary of the work of the subgroup, what's taken place and where the group is going, and happy to hear any questions or any input from the council on this approach.
Thanks, Jared. I see Bob has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Jared, for that summary. A question. I'm not an expert on economics of this at all, but I have been speaking off and on with Jigar Shah, who's high up in the U.S. Department of Energy now, and at his encouragement and that from others, I've been talking with Holmes, Hummel, and others who are expert on sort of private equity funding. And they make a convincing case that we could get a massive amount of funding through private equity firms into the state if it were to come through the utilities. And I'm wondering at all if the subgroup is talking about that at all. And if not, I would encourage you to perhaps ask Holmes to come in and talk to you for half an hour or something.
Yeah, and Bob, Holmes actually presented, or either Holmes or a member of her staff, to the transportation advisory panel when we were having some of these conversations, so that may make sense. The idea of engaging private capital is, could be one of the criteria. How does this policy, and I think it is one of the criteria, how does the particular policy enable the flow of private capital to support the implementation of the strategy? So why don't we take that under advisement? I can, raise that with the other or the other subgroup members when we next meet on July 20th.
Okay, thank you.
And it looks like Donna DeCarolis also has her hand up.
Hey, Jared, how are you?
Good, Donna.
Nice to
Thank
see
you.
you. A quick question on the material you reference here on resources for the future. Is that something that can be shared with the council, or is that something maybe I can just Google it and find it? I'm not sure, but I'd be interested in seeing more about other
Certainly.
jurisdictions. Yeah.
You know, I believe that their PowerPoint is posted, and they also had a written report that was really done independently, I think, of this effort. And I believe that is available, and I think it's been posted as well.
Okay.
Can
That's
anybody?
correct, Jared. I
Yep.
just double checked that. So
Okay, thank you. I'll take a look. That's great.
just in case folks listening want assistance in finding it too, it's on the Climate Act website. If you go to the Meetings and Events tab, there's a section at the bottom of that page for the subgroup materials.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yep. Peter Iwanowitz has his hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the overview, Jared. And Maureen, your earlier overview was spot on, so thank you for that. I mean, one thing that has definitely come up in the alt fuels subgroup, and I think will come up also in the economy-wide, is the input that we have received from the Climate Justice Working Group. And I know in the alt fuels subgroup, we've made a decision to try to basically set up a metric or a matrix rather of where we received input from the Climate Justice Working Group on various fuels, and I think we should do it for economy-wide policies as well, and make some determinations about how we're incorporating or not incorporating the advice we've gotten from the Climate Justice Working Group. And I guess Doreen and Basil, this is a comment for you. I hope we can do that as a broader council for all the chapters, is kind of go through before we finalize the scoping plan. As the law requires us to do, we've provided an opportunity for advice and input from the Climate Justice Working Group, but I don't think we've had a level of discussion as the council writ large. It's certainly happening at the work groups now, but the council writ large of trying to weigh the input that we've received from the Climate Justice Working Group along the way, and how we are adjudicating one way or the other that input, whether we're agreeing with it and modifying the draft plan accordingly, or whether we are disagreeing with it and the reasons why we're doing that. So just wanted to sort of make a comment that that's happening in some of the work groups now, and it probably should happen overall with the council.
So it's a good idea. We'll take that back.
Yeah, and Peter, with regard to this subgroup, I think that's an ideal subject of discussion at the meeting on July 25, when we're going to be focusing on the equity criteria.
Yeah, I agree, and just giving you a heads up, and Maureen can fill you in on some of the stuff we've already started to look at with the all fuels.
Yep. Okay.
But I encourage you to do it for the broader, the plan. But so thanks, Basil, for agreeing that we should do it. I really think that's important.
And if I can just jump into on that, Peter, just to kind of add to what Jared and Basil were saying, I mean, that is the equity and climate justice issues are one of the topic areas where, I think I non-eloquently called it, a non-subgroup topic, but is still something that's outstanding before the council, and will also be something that we're looking to actively try to bring forward the Climate Justice Working Group's prior feedback, as well as any additional feedback that they would like to give on the draft scoping plan. And so we are working with the staff team on for the Climate Justice Working Group to figure out the right, the best mechanism for the Climate Justice Group to re-engage on this as well. So certainly not something that that we're not thinking about. We definitely are thinking about it, and we'll be working to bring some of their feedback into subsequent meetings as well.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that, and I didn't mean to, convey that we weren't thinking about it. I just wanted to put it down the table here in this public forum of the meeting of the council.
Yep. And I do not see any additional hands for Jared then.
All right, so I don't know if it goes back to you, Sarah, or to Doreen or Basil.
It looks like, yes, if we can go back to me, we'll go to the next steps slide. Thank you. So just quickly to cover the next steps that the council has before it. So for the subgroups will continue to meet at their current cadence of approximately 2 meetings a month. The meeting summaries will be posted to the Climate Act website, as I mentioned, under meetings and events. And then if you scroll to the bottom of the page, there's a section for the subgroup materials. And we'll also hear updated report outs at subsequent council meetings. With respect to public comments, we're going to be continuing to work through the public comments and are aiming to provide a summary to the council by the next meeting, which will be sometime in August. And I believe we've already started canvassing for that. And if you haven't seen a request for availability, you will see that shortly. And so, and then we'll also start publishing or start processing the comments for posting them publicly on the website. And then it's not mentioned here, but I did just want to briefly mention that we also are planning to propose an amendment to the Climate Action Council bylaws. This would be as a result of Chapter 56 of the laws of 2022, which added a new section to open meetings law. I am not a lawyer, but I am told that it would authorize the council to allow attendance of 1 or more members at a meeting remotely in the event of specific extenuating circumstances. And so as other public bodies in the state and NYSERDA's board has already done, we'll need to share that proposed amendment, obviously, with the council. We'll share it publicly. There needs to be an opportunity for public comment on the proposed amendment, and then we'd bring it to the council for a vote on the amendment. So just wanted to give you just a heads up that that we will be working to schedule a time for that. We'll be sharing the materials with you as council members as well. So I would expect it to be probably within the next month or so, but we'll certainly share any additional details as they become available. So that really concludes my next steps, but happy to take any questions. And I see that Paul Shepson has his hand up. Paul?
Thank you, Sarah. I just wanted to make a comment that in the gas transition group and at today's meeting, I've heard an awful lot of concerns about workforce issues, workforce anxiety, and development, and the future of New York State's existing workforce in the energy industries. And I just sort of feel that there's been a disconnect in the conversation between the carbon-based energy industries and the needs of the renewable energy industries with respect to workforce and engaging those private sector companies, you know, the Ørsted, Eversource, Equinor, and the analogous companies in solar. And I just feel like there's been little conversation about how we connect and engage the groups invested in the existing workforce assets in New York State and maximizing opportunities of the existing workforce and minimizing the pain. This is a conversation we've been having for weeks, but it feels a little bit imbalanced to me. And sort of along the lines of Raya's question and comment on this, it feels like we could do a better job engaging those industries that are going to be bringing jobs and contributing to New York State's green energy economy.
So I don't have the answer. It's a little out of my wheelhouse, but it's a feeling I've had that we could be better engaging those industries.
Yeah, I agree with you, Paul. Fundamentally, these are items that it's not that we finish the scoping plan and then figure out how to actually achieve its outcomes, right? This is about needing to do both at the same time. And that's, I think, you know, really what I hope we all took from today's discussion as well, that it's not one thing, it's all of these things together.
I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised from any other members. I'll just give it another moment. I think that's it. Back to you, Doreen and Basil, to close us out.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I think that's a wrap. I can't remember that there was any, this is the end of the slide deck, right?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, so just you have my sincere thanks for a robust discussion. Obviously, some critical next steps coming up over the summer, and my sincere thanks also to these subgroups. I know we're both representing the council, Basil and I, at these subgroups. That's a lot of time and a lot of work, but good progress being made nevertheless. So anything from you, Basil?
Nothing from me. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate all your time today. Of course, get outside while there's still some light.
Thank you all.
All right, everyone. See ya.
We still have 10 more hours of light, right?
Bye.
Absolutely. Going outside sounds good. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.